he was the king. And for a long time, nobody questioned it. He had changed everything. It's the way people sang, the way they moved, the way they felt about music. Before him, there was a clear line. After him, the world was different. He took country, blues, and gospel and mixed them together. He created a sound that was dangerous and new. It was the sound of a generation breaking free. This was in the 1950s. He was a force of nature, a supernova. Every record was a hit. Every movie was an event. Every television appearance stopped the country. He was more than a singer. He was a cultural earthquake. He had a raw energy that nobody could fake. It came from a deep place. It was real, but time moves on. And the 1960s were not the 1950s. A new sound came from across the ocean. 4 young men from Liverpool arrived. They had their own energy. They wrote their own songs. They had a charm and a wit that was different. They were a band, a self-contained unit. They were the new thing, and the king watched from his castle. His castle was in Hollywood. He was making movies. 3 a year sometimes. The movies were mostly the same. He played a charming guy who got into a bit of trouble, sang a few songs, and got the girl in the end. The formula worked for the studio. It made a lot of money. But it was killing him. The music was no longer dangerous. It was safe. It was for a soundtrack. It was written for a scene where he would be driving a race car or sitting on a beach. The fire was gone. He knew it. The people around him knew it. The world knew it. He was still Elvis. He was still the king. But his kingdom was shrinking. He was becoming a memory while he was still alive. He was isolated. He lived in a bubble, surrounded by his friends, his guys. The Memphis Mafia. They protected him from the world. But they also kept the world from him. He wasn't living a real life anymore. He was living the life of a famous person who was no longer at the center of the culture. He would stay up all night watching movies, talking, and wondering what happened. He saw what was happening with music. He heard the radio. He heard the Beatles. He heard the Rolling Stones. He heard Bob Dylan. They were writing about the world. They were changing. They were experimenting. Their music was growing up with their audience. His music was standing still. He was singing about clam bakes and puppet shows. It was a creative prison. He respected the new bands. He especially respected the ones from England. He knew they were good. He knew they had listened to his records. They had listened to the same blues and R&B artists he had listened to. They were part of the same family tree, but they were the new, vibrant branch. He felt like the old trunk. Strong, foundational, but not where the new leaves were growing. There was a rivalry, a quiet one. The Beatles were the biggest thing in the world. He had been the biggest thing in the world. There's only room for one at the very top. When they met once, in his home, it was awkward. 2 different worlds colliding. They were in awe of him, the man who started it all. He was curious about them, the boys who had taken over. They jammed a little. It was friendly. But underneath, there was a tension. The tension between the past and the present. Elvis felt trapped. He wanted to make real music again. He missed the feeling of a live audience. He missed the energy of a real band playing real music. He missed the danger, but he was under contract. The movie machine just kept rolling. And Colonel Tom Parker, his manager, was happy with the money. The Colonel didn't care about art. He cared about business, and the movie business was good. So Elvis languished. He gained weight, he grew bored, he was a lion in a cage, a very comfortable gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. He would tell his friends that he was tired of the songs he had to sing. He hated them. He knew they were garbage. But what could he do? He felt powerless. And then, in 1968, a song came out. It was a single by the Beatles. It wasn't like their recent stuff. Their recent stuff had been psychedelic. Strange sounds, studio tricks, deep lyrics. Sgt. Pepper had changed the idea of what an album could be. They were pushing music forward, but this new single, it was different. It sounded like a look back. The song started with a piano. A thumping, rolling, boogie-woogie piano. It had a rhythm that was instantly familiar. It was the sound of New Orleans. It was the sound of the 1950s. It sounded like Fats Domino. It was a pure, simple rock and roll song, had a swagger, had a groove. It was the kind of music that got into your bones. When Elvis heard it, something snapped. He was at home, someone played the record for him, he listened, and he got angry. It wasn't a quiet anger, it was a real visceral fury. His friends saw it, they saw the look on his face. This wasn't just another song, this was personal. He started pacing the room. He was cursing, he couldn't believe it. To him, this wasn't an homage, this wasn't a tribute to an older style. This was a direct shot, this was a challenge. He felt they were mocking him. He felt they were saying, see, we can do your music, the music you started. And we can do it now in 1968 and have a #1 hit with it. While you're in Hollywood singing about yoga. That's how he saw it. It was a slap in the face. The new Kings were playing in the old King's backyard. They were using his sound, his style, his musical language, and they were doing it effortlessly. It was a reminder of everything he had lost. It was a reminder of the musician he used to be. His friend Jerry Schilling was there. He later wrote about it. He said Elvis felt that the Beatles were showing him how it was done, that they were taking his original style and making it fresh again while he was stuck. He apparently said something like, "They're doing my music, they're doing my music." It was the specific sound that got to him. That Fats Domino New Orleans R&B piano riff, that was the DNA of his own music. That was the stuff he grew up on. That was the music he and his original band, Scotty Moore and Bill Black, were trying to capture in those early Sun studio sessions. It was his musical home. And here were these four guys from England who had already conquered the world with their own sound, coming back to his home turf and planting their flag. It was a complex feeling. It was partly jealousy. They had the creative freedom he craved. They could decide to make a psychedelic masterpiece one day and a 1950s rock and roll song the next. He had to sing whatever the soundtrack writers gave him. It was partly wounded pride. He was the king of rock and roll. And here was a rock and roll song, a perfect one, from the band that had replaced him on the throne. It underscored his own irrelevance at that moment. The world was listening to them do his thing, not him do his thing. But underneath the anger and the pride, there was something else. There was a spark. The song woke him up. It was a bucket of cold water. It wasn't just a challenge. It was an inspiration. It was a reminder of who he was. He couldn't get the song out of his head. It was the catalyst for a change that was already brewing inside him. He had been talking about wanting to perform live again. He was tired of the movies. He was tired of the joke he had become. This song was the final push. It made him realize that he had to fight back, not by bad-mouthing the Beatles, but by reminding the world who he was. He couldn't let them have the last word on his own style of music. He had to go back to the source. He had to reclaim his crown. This feeling, this fire that the song lit, led him directly to what happened next. A television special was being planned. The original idea from his manager was a simple, safe Christmas show. Elvis would wear a tuxedo and sing Christmas carols. It would be another piece of safe, family-friendly entertainment. It would have been another nail in the coffin of his creative life. But Elvis, spurred by this new sense of urgency, refused. He and a young, ambitious director named Steve Binder had a different idea. They decided to do something real, something dangerous. They decided to remind people of the 1950s Elvis. Not by copying it, but by unleashing it in its 1968 form. He was 33 years old. He wasn't a kid anymore. But the fire was still there. He just needed to let it out. The result was the 68 comeback special. It was one of the most incredible moments in music history. He walked out on stage in a suit of black leather. He looked lean. He looked hungry. He looked dangerous again. There was no big orchestra, no fancy sets for most of it. For the key segments, it was just him, a small stage, and some of his old musician friends, including his original guitarist, Scotty Moore. It was informal, it was raw. They sat in a circle and just played. It was like a jam session, but the whole world was watching. He sang his old hits, Heartbreak Hotel, Jailhouse Rock, Hound Dog. But he didn't sing them like an oldies act, and he sang them with a power and a passion that was breathtaking. The snarl was back. The swagger was back. The sweat was real. He was pouring every ounce of his frustration, his boredom, and his ambition into that performance. He was proving a point. He was answering the challenge. He was showing the Beatles and the world that this music wasn't a throwback for him. It was who he was. It was in his blood. He didn't have to imitate it. He embodied it. He was the source. The 68 comeback special was a massive success. It completely revitalized his career. It reminded everyone why he was the king in the first place. It made him a relevant artist again. It led to him leaving Hollywood and returning to live performing in Las Vegas. It led to some of the best music of his later career, songs like Suspicious Minds and In the Ghetto. It was a complete turning point, and while many things led to it, the fuse was lit by that one song. That one simple piano-pounding rock and roll song from his biggest rivals. They probably never intended it as a challenge. Paul McCartney, who wrote the song, was just paying tribute to a style of music he loved. He was a brilliant musician who could play in any style he wanted. For him, it was a fun exercise. Oh, a nod to the past. But for Elvis, in his specific situation, it was everything. It was a mirror held up to him. It showed him the artist he once was, and the artist he could be again. It forced him to confront his own decline. The anger it provoked was the fuel he needed. It made him fight for his own legacy. It's strange how art works. A song can mean one thing to the person who creates it, and something entirely different to the person who hears it. For the Beatles, it was another great single in a string of great singles. For Elvis Presley, it was a wake-up call. A challenge from the new kings that forced the old king to get off his throne and show everyone why he was still wearing the crown. The song was Lady Madonna.